A snowstorm is swallowing Portland. The wind shrieks through the steel beams of the bridge. A German Shepherd K9, Shadow, strains his leash, growling into a pile of soaked rags. Under the flashlight, a horrifying sight. A 5-year-old boy, Leo, is shivering. He isn't shielding himself. He is using his body as a human shield for his baby sister, an infant turning blue from the cold. Officer Cale Riley, a grieving man, brings them home, but that act of mercy will be weaponized. A leaked photo. A grieving uncle who suddenly appears, backed by a slick lawyer. A reporter smells money and paints the hero as a villain. They don't know that, in a dark room at the precinct, a loyal colleague is following the digital trail. An anonymous tip will expose the entire conspiracy. What happens next will make you believe in quiet heroes and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Portland, Oregon was not just raining, it was being consumed by a deluge of liquid ice. The late November night was a fractured black mirror, shattering the blurred neon of downtown signs onto streets that had transformed into shallow, frigid rivers. An unrelenting wind drove the icy rain sideways, a million stinging needles attacking any exposed skin. This was not the gentle, misty drizzle that tourism brochures boasted about. This was a raw, penetrating cold that found its way past waterproof seams and under armored collars, a cold that settled deep into the bone. The city felt hollowed out, its population having surrendered, leaving the streets to the storm. Far below the hum of the city, the Willamette River churned, a dark and agitated mass of water, reflecting the skeletal steel geometry of the Hawthorne Bridge. Inside Portland Police Bureau Cruiser 415, the atmosphere was a vacuum of quiet, a stark, insulated contrast to the elemental chaos raging just millimeters of glass away. Officer Cale Riley sat behind the wheel, the heavy-duty wipers fighting a losing battle, their rhythmic thwack, 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 setting a hypnotic, lonely beat. Cale was 36, but the fine lines etched around his deep-set gray eyes spoke of more miles than years. He possessed a strong, angular jaw that was usually softened by a neat beard, but tonight it was clean-shaven per regulation, making his face look starker, paler in the faint green glow of the dashboard instruments. His gaze was constant, sweeping the desolate streets with a practiced, almost weary vigilance. He was a man built on discipline and quiet observation, a necessary fortress against the disorder he witnessed daily. He'd been on the force for 12 years, the last 4 partnered with the K9 unit, a move that had saved him in more ways than one. Before the badge, before the uniform, there was a different life, a life shattered by loss, a life he meticulously boxed up and buried every morning when he pinned on his badge. In the custom-fitted space behind him, his partner was not resting. Shadow, a magnificent 6-year-old German Shepherd, was alert, a solid mass of black muscle and honed instinct. The only break in his dark coat was the sharp, intelligent amber of his eyes, which Cale could see watching him in the rearview mirror. Shadow was the pinnacle of police training, an animal capable of incredible focus and controlled aggression. Yet his bond with Cale was something that transcended simple training. It was a silent, absolute trust forged in the crucible of countless high-risk calls and endless, silent patrols. The dog's steady, quiet breathing was a living anchor for Cale, a comforting presence in the profound solitude of the cruiser. Cale slowed the vehicle, turning off the main thoroughfare onto the slick cobblestone of the access road that ran parallel to the riverfront, dipping the cruiser into the yawning, graffiti-scarred darkness beneath the Hawthorne Bridge. This was a routine check, an area notorious for transient camps seeking shelter from the elements. But tonight, the storm was so violent that Cale expected it to be deserted. Even the most desperate would have sought deeper, safer cover. The cruiser was almost clear of the massive underpass when it happened. Shadow, in one fluid, explosive motion, went from watchful stillness to rigid tension. A low, deep woof vibrated from his chest, a sound Cale knew well. It was not a growl of aggression, it was an alert. "What is it, boy?" Cale murmured, his foot tapping the brake, the cruiser rolling to a stop. Shadow escalated, a sharp, insistent bark cutting through the cabin, followed by a high-pitched whine. He began to scratch at the kennel door, his entire body trembling, his focus locked on a recess between two massive concrete footings, a patch of absolute blackness that Kyle's spotlight had barely grazed. All right, I hear you. Kale's trust in Shadow was implicit. The dog's senses were an instrument far more precise than any human intuition, and Shadow never gave a false alert. Kale angled the cruiser, flooding the area with the harsh white glare of his headlights. He pulled the hood of his rain slicker up, the heavy material crackling as he stepped out into the assault. The cold was a physical blow, instantly stealing his breath as ice water soaked his trousers. The noise under the bridge was a deafening symphony of chaos. The roar of unseen traffic vibrating through the concrete overhead, the percussive hammering of the rain on the steel beams, and the mournful howl of the wind funneling through the structure. "This is Officer Riley, Portland Police. Anyone in here?" His voice was swallowed, seeming to travel only a few feet before being ripped away by the storm. He unclipped his heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp cone through the sheeting rain. He moved cautiously, his hand resting on the reassuring grip of his sidearm, his light dancing over piles of sodden trash, discarded clothing, and the damp, rotting cardboard of failed shelters. He reached the spot Shadow had indicated. Nothing. Just a mound of filthy blankets and black, glistening trash bags piled against the concrete wall, a pathetic barrier against the wind. He almost turned back, dismissing it as a rat's nest, but Shadow was now barking frantically from the car, a frantic, desperate sound. Kyle leaned closer, flashlight beam steady, and that's when he saw it. A tremor. The pile of rags moved. Kale's blood ran cold, colder than the rain. "Police, show yourself now!" he commanded, his voice sharp, authoritative. The pile shifted again, and from beneath a sodden piece of tarp, a small, terrified face peered out. It was a child, a little boy, no older than 5, with huge dark eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to steal all the air from Kyle's lungs. A mop of soaked dark hair was plastered to his skull, and his skin was a pale, bluish gray that looked horrifyingly unnatural under the white light. He was shivering so violently that his teeth chattered audibly, a rapid, desperate click, click, click. "It's okay, kid," Kyle said, his voice instantly softening, his training kicking in as he lowered the flashlight beam away from the boy's eyes. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm a police officer. I'm here to help." The boy just stared, paralyzed, his small body rigid. Kale took a slow, deliberate step closer, sinking to one knee on the icy gravel, and that's when he understood. The boy wasn't just hiding, he was shielding something. He was curled protectively around an even smaller bundle. He was using his own frail, freezing body as a human barrier against the storm. "Oh my God," Kale whispered, the words punched out of him. "Son, are you okay? Who's with you?" The boy, who Kale would later learn was named Leo, finally spoke. His voice was a reedy, frail whisper, barely audible over the wind. "Please, she's cold. Please, don't take her." He shifted, his tiny hands fumbling with the rags, and Kyle's light fell on the bundle. It was a baby, a newborn, wrapped in nothing but a thin, damp hospital receiving blanket, its tiny, wrinkled face still and waxy. For one heart-stopping, horrifying second, Kale was certain he was looking at a dead child. His adrenaline surged, a cold, sharp wave of focus that cut through the shock. "I'm here to help," he repeated, his voice low and steady, trying to project a calm he did not feel. He reached out slowly, gloved hands raised. "Let me see, Leo. Let me help your sister." Leo flinched, but was too weak, too frozen to resist. Kyle gently pushed aside the blanket. The baby's skin was ice cold to the touch, but as he laid 2 fingers against the tiny neck, a faint, shallow mewl escaped its blue lips, a sound more like a kitten than a human. Alive. Barely. As if that tiny sound had broken the spell, Leo's terrified focus finally shattered. His body went limp, his eyes rolling back slightly, as a wave of absolute exhaustion and hypothermia claimed him. Kyle didn't hesitate. He ripped open the front of his radio. "Cruiser 415 to dispatch. I need medics at my location, Hawthorne Bridge, Eastside Underpass, code 3. I have 2 pediatric exposures, 1 infant, critical condition, expedite now." Without waiting for a reply, Kyle tore off his own heavy, insulated, police-issue jacket, the barrier that had kept him warm and dry. In one swift motion, he enveloped both children in it, pulling the small, shivering 5-year-old and the terrifyingly still infant Cora against his own chest, trying to force his own body heat into their frozen frames. The rain hammered down relentlessly as Kale knelt on the frozen ground, shielding his precious, impossible discovery, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. The sirens were a Doppler-shifted scream that tore through the storm, arriving moments after Kyle's call but feeling like an eternity. Red and blue lights pulsed against the wet concrete, creating a chaotic, flashing tableau of the rescue. 2 paramedics, faces grim and movements efficient, navigated the slick gravel down to Kyle's position. He remained kneeling, a human shield, the heat from his own body a meager offering against their profound cold. "What do we have, PD?" the lead medic shouted over the din. Kale looked up, his face pale and set. 2 pediatric exposures, male, approx 5, infant female, neonate, both critical hypothermia. The infant is barely responsive. The transfer was a blur of hands and thermal blankets. The moment Kyle's jacket was peeled back, exposing the children to the medics, Leo, who had been lapsing into a hypothermic stupor, was shocked back to consciousness by the movement and the presence of new strangers. He let out a thin, terrified wail, and his small, frost-numbed hands clawed weakly, not for his sister, but for the one constant he'd known for the last 20 minutes, Kyle. "It's okay, Leo. They're here to help," Kyle said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. He hated the feeling of helplessness that washed over him as the medics expertly scooped up both children, securing the infant, Cora, in a neonatal transport incubator and strapping Leo onto a gurney. Shadow was barking wildly in the cruiser, a frantic percussive sound that echoed Kyle's own internal alarm. He followed them back to the ambulance, a soaked, muddy officer now stripped of his armor, feeling useless. "Ride with us?" the medic asked. Kale shook his head, gesturing to his cruiser. "I'll follow you in. Shadow's with me. Emmanuel?" The medic nodded. "Emmanuel, we'll have the trauma team waiting." The drive was a high-stress blur. Kale's cruiser, with Shadow now quiet, sensing the urgency, tailing the ambulance, sirens cutting a path through the sleeping, rain-drenched city. He arrived at the Emmanuel Hospital emergency bay, just as they were wheeling the children through the sliding doors. The sudden transition from the howling, icy dark to the sterile, fluorescent brilliance of the trauma bay was a shock. The air was too warm, too dry, and smelled sharply of antiseptic and floor wax. A team of doctors and nurses descended on the gurneys, a flurry of blue scrubs and clipped professional commands. "Infant to trauma 1, get me vitals. Core temp is dangerously low. Pediatric to trauma 2, start warming protocols." Kyle was gently but firmly guided aside by a triage nurse, his uniform and muddy boots marking him as an outsider in this sterile domain. He stood just outside the curtained-off area, dripping onto the polished linoleum, watching the frantic, focused activity. He felt a profound sense of dislocation. Out there, on the street, he was in command. In here, he was just a witness. Hours seemed to crawl by. Kale's shift had officially ended at 2 a.m. It was now approaching 4:30 a.m. He had sent a brief, concise text to his captain, Eva Rostova. "Found 2 abandoned children, hypothermic. Following ambulance to Emmanuel. Will update." Her reply was immediate. "Keep me posted. Send sit rep when able. Good work." He paced the fluorescent-lit hallway, the adrenaline from the rescue fading, leaving behind a bone-deep chill and an aching exhaustion. He'd retrieved his jacket from the ambulance, but it was soaked through and useless. He finally got an update from a young pediatric resident, Dr. Eris Thorne, a kind-looking man whose face was etched with fatigue. "Officer Riley," he said, peeling off his gloves. "Their core temperatures are rising. The little girl, Cora, she's very, very fragile. Severe hypothermia and hypoglycemia, but she's fighting. We have her in the NICU. She's stable, for now." Kale let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "And the boy, Leo?" Dr. Thorne managed a small, tired smile. "He's tougher than he looks. His vitals are stabilizing quickly. He's scared to death, though. He keeps asking for the doggy." Kyle nodded, a strange lump forming in his throat. "Shadow, my partner." He was allowed to see Leo a few minutes later. The boy was dwarfed by the hospital bed, his gray-blue skin, now a more natural, pale white after a warm bath. He was dressed in a small blue gown with cartoon whales on it, and he was sipping warm apple juice from a cup with a straw, his eyes still wide and haunted. When he saw Kale walk in, his entire body tensed, but then relaxed just a fraction. He recognized his rescuer. "Hey, buddy," Kale said softly, keeping his voice low. "You're safe now. You're warm." Leo just stared at him, then his gaze darted around the room. "Cora?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Cora is safe too," Kale reassured him. "The doctors are making her warm. She's in a special room right next door." He paused, then added, "And Shadow is safe too. He's waiting in the car." Leo seemed to accept this, his small body finally uncurling from its defensive ball. He was just starting to drift into an exhausted sleep when a new figure appeared in the doorway, and the fragile peace of the room instantly evaporated. The man was in his late 40s, with a reedy frame that seemed lost inside a rumpled, off-the-rack gray suit. His thinning, mousy brown hair was combed meticulously over his scalp, and he peered at Kyle through thick, wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a battered leather briefcase in one hand and a clipboard in the other, like a shield. His face was pale, his features pinched, and his thin, bloodless mouth looked as if it had never formed a smile. This was Mr. Warren, a supervisor from the Department of Child Protective Services. "Officer Riley," he said, his voice a flat nasal monotone that perfectly matched his appearance. "I'm Mr. Warren, CPS. I have your preliminary report, and Dr. Thorne has signed off on the boy's medical release." Kyle nodded, his internal guard immediately going up. There was something in the man's detached, bureaucratic air that set his teeth on edge. "Good. He needs to rest." Mr. Warren made a small, impatient ticking sound with his tongue. "He will, officer. He'll be transported to the St. Mark's emergency shelter within the hour." Kyle frowned. "And his sister?" Warren didn't even look at Leo, who was now awake, watching the exchange with growing alarm. "The infant is in the NICU. She is a ward of the state and will remain here until medically cleared, at which point she will be placed in a specialized neonatal foster facility." Kyle processed this. "So, they'll be separated." It wasn't a question. It was a cold realization. Mr. Warren finally looked at Kale as if he were explaining a simple, tedious rule. "Of course, we don't have a single facility equipped to handle both a medically fragile neonate and a 5-year-old. Protocol is clear. They will be placed in separate, age-appropriate care centers." From the bed, a small, terrified voice piped up. "No!" Leo scrambled to his feet in the oversized bed, his eyes wide with the same primal terror Kyle had seen under the bridge. "No! I gotta stay with Cora! No!" Mr. Warren sighed, a sound of pure administrative annoyance. "Officer, if you'll please handle the boy." But Kale had turned his back on Warren. He moved to the bedside, putting a hand on Leo's small shoulder. "It's okay, Leo. I'm right here." He then turned back to Warren, his gray eyes now as cold and hard as the river. "No, I beg your pardon," Warren said, his pale eyebrows rising. "I said, no, we're not doing that." Kale's voice was dangerously quiet. "You are not separating them. That boy kept his sister alive tonight. He is the only thing she has, and she is the only thing he has. You take him away from her, you'll break him. I won't let that happen." Mr. Warren's face flushed a dull, blotchy red. "Officer Riley, your involvement in this case concluded when you handed them over to the medics. This is a CPS matter, and the protocol is non-negotiable. I have a court order for placement." He waved the clipboard. "You are interfering." "I'm interfering," Kale repeated, his voice low. He took a step, unconsciously placing himself between Warren and Leo's bed. "I'm the one who found them. I'm the one who promised him he was safe. And he is not safe if you tear him away from his sister. Find another way." "There is no other way," Warren snapped, his bureaucratic patience finally breaking. "Now, stand aside, or I will have your captain informed that you are obstructing a state placement." The standoff hung in the sterile air, a clash of raw, protective instinct against cold, unfeeling procedure. Kyle looked from Warren's pinched, angry face to Leo's small, trembling form, and a promise he hadn't even realized he'd made solidified in his mind. He would not fail these children, not tonight. The sterile air in the hospital room crackled with a new, colder tension. Mr. Warren's blotchy, indignant face was a mask of bureaucratic fury, his wire-rimmed glasses halfway down his thin nose. "Officer, I am warning you for the last time. Your obstruction is being noted." Before Kyle could respond, his voice dangerously low, the curtain was pulled back by Dr. Thorne. The young resident's face, previously kind, was now sharp with medical authority. "Gentlemen, out. Both of you." He pointedly ignored Warren, his gaze fixed on the heart monitor beside Leo's bed. "This child's heart rate is tachycardic, and his blood pressure is spiking. He just survived severe hypothermia. I will not have him stressed into a cardiac event by two adults arguing over him. This is a pediatric unit, not a courtroom." Warren sputtered. "Doctor, this is a state-mandated—" Dr. Thorne cut him off, his voice flat. "This is my patient. You are agitating him. Leave, now." The command was absolute. Warren, clearly incensed at being overruled, gathered his clipboard, straightened his rumpled suit jacket, and shot Cale a look of pure venom. "This is far from over, officer. You will be hearing from my superiors. And yours." He stormed out of the room, his footsteps squeaking angrily on the linoleum. Dr. Thorne watched him go before turning to Kyle, his expression softening slightly. "He's not wrong about the agitation, officer. The boy needs to rest. You're a fixed point for him. But this isn't helping." Kyle looked at Leo, whose small, pale face was wet with silent tears, his eyes locked on Cale in a plea. Kale's heart broke. "I'll be back, Leo," he whispered, a promise that felt like a lie. "You rest." He turned and walked out, the sterile smell of the hallway feeling like a failure. He had to file his report, get Shadow home, and shower. He was 26 hours into a 12-hour shift. He was walking through the hospital's main atrium, a glass and steel cavern that was now catching the first, sickly gray light of dawn, when a flash went off to his left. He flinched, his hand instinctively moving to his hip, his eyes scanning for a threat. "Officer Riley?" A woman stepped out from the shadow of a large, podded ficus tree. She was in her mid-30s, with a sharply cut black bob that was impervious to the humidity. She wore a stylish dark gray trench coat over a professional blouse, and her intelligent dark eyes held a rapier-like focus. She held up her phone, but her smile was her real weapon, bright, practiced, and showing just a few too many teeth. "Carla Velez, Portland Chronicle," she said, her voice crisp and confident. "Quite a night you've had. Is it true you rescued 2 children from under the Hawthorne Bridge?" Kyle's internal shield slammed down. "No comment." He kept walking, his long strides forcing her to almost jog to keep up. "Come on, officer," she pressed, easily matching his pace, her voice dripping with manufactured empathy. The city is desperate for a hero story. A cop, his faithful canine. It's gold. I just want to get your side of the story. I filed my report. It's public record. I'm not talking about the report. I'm talking about what happened upstairs." Cale stopped, forcing her to halt to avoid running into him. He was a good foot taller, his mud-streaked, exhausted presence a stark contrast to her polished professionalism. "How do you know about that?" She didn't flinch. "I have sources. I heard you had a disagreement with the CPS supervisor. I heard you refused to let him take the boy." Her smile widened. "So, what's the angle? Is the Portland Police Bureau now in the business of dictating CPS policy? That's a much better story." Cale felt a cold dread mix with his anger. "You're interfering with a police matter involving minors," he said, his voice flat. "Back off, Miss Velez." "Or what?" she challenged, her smile never wavering, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of the chase. "Or you'll obstruct me too." Kyle just stared at her, then turned and walked away, the click-clack of her heels following him until he pushed through the glass doors and into the cold, damp morning. He drove home in a haze, the bad encounter with Velez souring the small victory over Warren. He got shadow fed, stood under a scalding shower for 20 minutes without moving, and then collapsed into his armchair, his phone on the table. He was too tired to sleep, too wired to rest. He finally dozes, only to be jolted awake at 9 a.m. by his phone vibrating violently on the wooden tabletop. It was a cascade of texts, one after another, a digital avalanche. He swiped one open. It was from a patrol buddy. "Dude, have you seen the Chronicle's homepage?" He fumbled with his phone, his fingers thick, and pulled up the website. The entire top half of the screen was one image, It wasn't the photo Velez took in the lobby, it was worse. Someone, a nurse or a visitor, must have snapped it from the hallway. The photo was shot through the small window of Leo's room. It was perfectly, terribly framed. Kyle, in his dark mud-caked uniform, his face haggard, standing rigid and towering over the smaller, reedy form of Mr. Warren, who looked pinched and intimidated. In the background, a small, terrified face, Leo, was visible in the bed. The composition was clear. Big, intimidating cop bullying a small, ineffectual bureaucrat. And underneath, the headline, Portland's Finest, Hero, or Overreach. He read the first few lines, his stomach clenching. Carla Velez was a masterful, cynical writer. She opened with a dramatic, heart-pounding account of the hero rescue, praising Kale and Shadow's bravery. Then she pivoted. But sources within the hospital, she wrote, describe a different scene unfolding hours later. Witnesses report Officer Riley physically obstructing a CPS supervisor, intimidating the caseworker, and refusing to stand down even when ordered. He was traumatizing the child all over again, one source claimed. The article subtly questioned whether a decorated officer with a known high-stress incident record, a low blow referencing a shooting from 3 years prior, was emotionally stable enough to be making decisions for traumatized children. Kale felt sick. She had painted him as both the hero and the villain, a volatile, unstable man. His phone rang, the screen flashing a name that made his stomach drop. Capt. Eva Rostova. He walked into the precinct 15 minutes later. The rain had passed, leaving a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The walk through the bullpen was a gauntlet of silence. He could see the Chronicle website open on half a dozen screens. He got a few sympathetic nods, but mostly, people just found their paperwork suddenly fascinating. He stood in the doorway of his captain's office. Captain Eva Rostova was a woman who commanded respect through sheer, unadulterated presence. She was in her late 50s, tall and lean, with a spine made of steel. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back into a bun so severe it seemed to pull her face taut, emphasizing her high cheekbones and intelligent dark eyes. She had been a homicide detective for 20 years, and it was said she could smell a lie before it was even fully formed. She wore a perfectly pressed uniform, and she did not look up when he entered. "Shut the door, Riley," she said, her voice a low contralto that never needed to be raised. He did, the click of the latch sounding deafeningly loud. She was holding a tablet, the Chronicle article glowing on its screen. She slid it across her immaculate desk. "Explain," she said. It wasn't a request. Kale took a breath. "I filed my report, ma'am." "I read your report," Rostova said, finally looking up. Her gaze was as sharp and flat as obsidian. "Your report mentions a jurisdictional disagreement. This," she tapped the screen, "is not a disagreement. This is a political nightmare. Warren's supervisor and the mayor's office have been calling me since 7 a.m. They seem to be under the impression I have an officer who is volatile, insubordinate, and playing social worker. So, explain to me, why are you playing social worker, Riley?" Kyle stood at rigid attention. "I found them, ma'am. That boy, he used his own body to keep his sister from freezing. He was terrified. Warren was going to separate them. He called it protocol. The boy didn't understand protocol. He just understood that he was being taken away from his sister. I told Warren to find another way." Rostova listened, her face completely unreadable, her fingers steepled. "The world is full of things 5-year-olds don't understand, Riley. Mortgages, war, and CP's protocol. That doesn't give you the right to rewrite the rulebook. You're a police officer. You enforce the law. You don't make it." She sighed, a deep, weary sound. "But this Velez woman is sharp. She's painted you into a corner, and you dragged this entire precinct in. With you, Warren has filed a formal complaint. Obstruction, intimidation, conduct unbecoming." "What are my orders, Captain?" Kyle asked, his voice steady, though his heart was hammering. Rostova leaned back, her chair groaning in protest. "Your orders are to go home. You are on paid administrative leave, pending a formal review. You are to stay away from Emmanuel Hospital. You are to stay away from CPS. And you are, under no circumstances, to speak to those children again. You are officially off this case. Let the detectives and CPS handle it. Is that clear?" It was a gut punch. "Ma'am, Warren will separate them. He'll win. That, Rostova said, her voice chillingly final, is no longer your concern, officer. You've done enough. Kalen Riley was a man of action, a man whose entire life was built on routine, response, and forward momentum. Paid administrative leave, he discovered, was not a vacation. It was a special kind of cage, a soundproof room where he was forced to watch the world burn on mute. He'd been home for 24 hours, and the silence of his small, immaculate bungalow in the Selwood district was deafening. He'd cleaned his service weapon twice. He'd reorganized the garage. He'd taken Shadow on 3 long, restless runs, but the German Shepherd, usually placid and steady off-duty, was unsettled. Shadow mirrored his partner, and his partner was vibrating with a silent, contained rage. Kale sat in his worn leather armchair, coffee long cold, his gaze fixed on the television. He was in worn gray sweatpants and a threadbare PPB training hoodie, a uniform of helplessness. The rain had finally passed, but the city was now saturated with a new kind of storm. His storm. The story of the bridge babies, as the media had dubbed them, was the only thing on local news. And at the center of it, reveling in the spotlight, was Carla Velez. She was no longer just a reporter. She was the narrative's conductor. While Officer Riley, now on administrative leave pending an internal review, remains silent, the city is asking. Kyle muted her, his thumb jabbing the button. He'd failed. He'd tried to protect Leo and Cora and had, instead, left them completely defenseless. Captain Rostova's orders had been absolute. Stay away. Let CPS handle it. But he knew who CPS was. It was Mr. Warren. It was cold protocol and separate facilities. It was the sterile, bureaucratic machine that was about to chew Leo and Cora up and spit them out as 2 separate, traumatized case files. He was scrolling through the Chronicle's comment section, a toxic sewer of opinions branding him as either a saint or a jackbooted thug, when the screen cut from a car commercial to a live breaking news banner. It was a shot of the steps of the CPS building downtown. A small podium was set up, bristling with microphones. "We're just getting this, Chuck," the field reporter said. "It appears a family member of the bridge babies has come forward." Kyle's blood turned to ice. He sat up, his body rigid, Shadow's head instantly lifting from his paws. A man Kyle didn't recognize stepped up to the podium, flanked by a man in a suit that was just a little too shiny, a little too tight. This second man, presumably the lawyer, took the mic first. "My name is Mr. Finch," the lawyer said, his voice slick and practiced. "And this is Marcus Holt. Mr. Holt is the maternal uncle of the 2 minor children, Leo and Cora, who were so tragically found abandoned 2 nights ago." Finch put a performative, comforting hand on the shoulder of Marcus Holt. This was the main event. Kyle studied the man. Marcus Holt was perhaps in his late 30s, but he looked older, with the sallow, papery skin of a man who didn't sleep or ate his vegetables. He was thin, with narrow shoulders, and was drowning in a cheap charcoal gray suit that he'd clearly bought for the occasion. His thin, oily brown hair was damp, as if he'd been sweating profusely, and he was unshaven. Not with a beard, but with the patchy, 3-day-old stubble of pure neglect. He looked, Kale thought, like a man who'd just crawled out of a hole. When Marcus spoke, his voice cracked, and he immediately brought a hand to his face, dabbing at eyes that Kale could see were perfectly dry. I can't believe this," Marcus choked out, a performance of grief that was just slightly off-key. My sister, we were estranged, but I've been looking for her. I've been worried sick. I had no idea, that it would come to this." He took a shuddering breath. "And then I see my nephew, my little Leo, on the news." Kale's jaw was so tight his teeth ached. He saw him on the news, not when he was freezing, not when he was starving, on the news. "I want to thank that police officer, Riley, for saving them," Marcus continued, his lawyer clearly having prepped him on the talking point. "He's a hero, but they're my family. They're my blood. A hospital, a police station, that's no place for them." Mr. Finch stepped in, his voice firm. "Which is why, as of 1 hour ago, Mr. Holt has filed an emergency petition for custody. We are demanding that CPS release these children from state care and place them with their only living relative, a man who loves them and is prepared to give them the stable, loving home they deserve. The camera flashes erupted. Marcus Holt squinted, then managed to produce a single, genuine tear, which rolled slowly down his unhealthy-looking cheek. Carla Velez, who had somehow gotten a front-row spot, shouted the first question. "Mr. Holt, where have you been for the last 2 days? Where was this loving home when these children were freezing to death?" Finch immediately took the mic. "My client was handling a family emergency out of state and was unreachable. He will not be answering any more questions at this time. We pray for the swift, just return of his family." They were hustled away, leaving the media in a feeding frenzy. KL stood up, his body thrumming with a cop's intuition, an unmistakable, visceral certainty that he had just watched a liar, a very bad one. This wasn't a rescue. This was an angle. This was an opportunity. He was unreachable. Kyle snorted. He was a cop on leave. He had no access to the PPB database. He couldn't run a background check. He couldn't check for warrants. He was blind, deaf, and shackled. But he wasn't alone. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart, a number in the cybercrimes division. After 3 rings, a quick, sharp voice answered. "Chen." "Mia, it's Kyle." There was a pause. "Kyle, you're trending on Twitter. Congrats." Officer Mia. Chen was the opposite of Kyle. Where he was instinct and observation, she was data and code. She was 29, looked 20, and had the analytical mind of a supercomputer. She was the best cyber forensics officer on the force, a digital ghost who could pull a man's entire life from the ether. "Mia, I'm in a jam." "You're on leave, KL," she said, her voice dropping, "which means you're calling my personal cell, which means this is not an official call, which means I should hang up." "Don't, please." He almost never said please. It hung in the air. "I need a name run, quietly, deep quietly. Off the books, no record, no trace." "Kyle, that's my badge. That's your badge. I just saw the article. Rostova will skin us both." I know what I'm asking. But this isn't right. It's for the kids, Mia. The ones from the bridge." He could hear her sigh, a sharp exhale of static. "This Velez reporter is painting you as unstable, obsessive. Maybe they're right. Just run the name, please. Marcus Holt, Holt. He just popped up on TV as their uncle." Another longer pause. He heard the faint, rapid click-click-click of a keyboard. "I'm not doing this for you, Riley," she said finally. "I'm doing it because I don't like the look of that smarmy-ass lawyer he was with. Don't call me. Don't text me. If I find anything, I'll find you." The line went dead. Kyle lowered the phone, his heart hammering. He had just crossed the line Rostova had drawn, a line that could end his career. He looked at Shadow, who had stood up and was now watching him, his amber eyes filled with a deep, canine understanding. "I know, boy," Kale murmured, scrubbing his hand over the dog's head. "I know, but I'm not letting them go." The administrative leave was a new, insidious form of torture. Kale felt like a predator in a cage too small, forced to pace the confines of his own home, while the real threat, Marcus Holt, Mr. Warren, Carla Velez, circled his prey. He was trapped, staring at a phone that refused to ring, waiting for a text from Mia Chen that would either confirm his suspicions or shatter his hopes. He'd scrubbed his kitchen floor, detailed the interior of his truck, and reorganized his tactical gear. Shadow, sensing the volatile, static energy radiating from his partner, refused to settle, pacing the length of the living room with a low, anxious whine, his claws clicking on the hardwood floor. Every time a car slowed on the street, Kyle was at the window, half expecting to see an internal affairs vehicle, half hoping to see, he didn't even know what. He was a man suspended, stripped of his authority and his purpose. It was mid-afternoon on the second day of his leave when the knock finally came. It wasn't a cop's knock, firm and authoritative. It was light, hesitant, almost apologetic. Kyle moved to the door, his body tense. He looked through the peephole and saw a woman he didn't recognize. He opened the door on the chain, a barrier he rarely used. The woman on his porch was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, and looked utterly exhausted. She was drowning in a practical, knee-length beige raincoat, and her auburn hair was pulled back into a messy bun that had clearly been done in a hurry, with stray strands framing a face that was intelligent, freckled, and pale with anxiety. She clutched the strap of a large, overstuffed messenger bag as if it were a life raft, and her hazel eyes, magnified by slightly too large tortoiseshell glasses, were wide but determined. "Officer Riley?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. "My name is Grace Harding. I'm with CPS." Cale's hand tightened on the door. "I'm on leave. You know that. Warren send you to take my statement?" He started to close the door. "No," she said, a little too loudly, making him pause. "No, I'm not here for Mr. Warren. I'm here because of him. May I please come in? This isn't an official visit. I'm on my lunch break." Kyle stared at her for a long, cold moment. He saw no duplicity in her face, only a bone-deep weariness that matched his own. He undid the chain and stepped back. "Shadow Platz," he commanded. The shepherd, who had been standing rigidly at his side, immediately sank to the floor, his amber eyes never leaving the visitor. "Thank you," Grace said, stepping inside and gratefully accepting the door being closed against the damp Portland chill. She looked at Shadow. "He's beautiful." "He's working," Kyle said flatly. "What is this about, Ms. Harding?" Grace took a deep breath, pushing her glasses up her nose. "I was the floor administrator at Emmanuel when you brought Leo in. I didn't see the rescue, but I saw the confrontation with Mr. Warren. I heard what you said. And I saw Leo's vitals on the monitor when you argued." She met his gaze. "You were right. Warren was wrong. And now things are complicated." "Marcus Holt," Cale said, the name tasting like ash. Grace nodded, her expression grim. "He's filed the petition. A judge has to hear it. He's family. But his appearance, frankly, he spooked my supervisors. And your journalist friend, Ms. Velez, her article has put our entire department under a microscope. Nobody wants to make a wrong move. So, Holt doesn't get the kids?" Cale felt a dangerous spark of hope. "Not yet. But here's the problem. Mr. Warren is still the primary on the case. And he's using Holt's petition and the media circus as an excuse. He's filing an emergency motion to move Leo to the St. Mark's shelter today, citing the unstable hospital environment. He's still going to separate them, officer. He's just using a different reason." The hope vanished, replaced by a cold rage. "He's doing it to spite me. He's doing it because it's the only protocol he knows," Grace corrected gently. "And he's winning, unless—" She trailed off, biting her lip. "Unless what?" Grace clutched her bag tighter. "Unless there's a third option, a non-relative placement with a pre-existing emotional bond. It's a type of emergency foster certification. It's rare, but it's legal. It would supersede Warren's placement and temporarily block Holt's petition until a full hearing can be scheduled." Cale stared at her. "Me? You're talking about me. You are the only person Leo trusts," she said simply. "He's stopped speaking to the nurses. He just curls up and watches the door. He's waiting for you." Cale felt the lump return to his throat. "Ms. Harding, I appreciate this, but I'm the problem. I'm on administrative leave for intimidation. I'm the volatile cop from the front page. No judge will ever sign off on that." "They will," Grace said, a new fire in her eyes, "if they have a compelling counter-argument. The judge on duty today is Judge Miller. She doesn't like Mr. Warren, and she hates the media. I can file the 8.1b form right now, citing the clear, documented emotional bond. But it's not enough. It needs a high-level character reference. Someone who can vouch that your intimidation was, in fact, protective instinct. It needs your captain." Cale's blood ran cold. "Rostova. She's the one who put me on leave. She ordered me to stay away from this case." "Then you'll have to convince her to change her mind," Grace said, her voice unwavering. The silence in the room stretched, broken only by Shadow's quiet breathing. Cale was being asked to choose, his career or these children. He realized, with a terrifying clarity, that it wasn't a choice at all. He picked up his phone. He dialed. It rang once. "Rostova." "Captain, it's Riley." There was a heavy, dangerous sigh on the other end. "Riley, you have exactly 10 seconds to explain why you are violating a direct order." "Ma'am, I have a CPS worker in my home, Grace Harding. She's not with Warren. She has a legal pathway to keep the children together and out of the shelter system. It's an 8.1b emergency placement with me. Warren is moving Leo today. This is the only way to stop him. It, it requires your signature, ma'am, a character reference. The silence that followed was so complete, Kyle thought she might have hung up. You put a social worker in your home, Rostova stated, her voice dangerously quiet. You've dragged this precinct into a political war, Riley, and now you're asking me to give you more ammunition? I'm asking you to protect them, Captain. This isn't about me, it's about them. Everything is about you right now, officer. Do you have any idea? She cut herself off, another long sigh. Give me the social worker's name again. Grace Harding, ma'am. Put her on the phone, now. Kyle handed his phone to Grace, whose hand was visibly shaking. Hello? Captain Rostova? Yes, ma'am. Yes, the 8.1B. I believe it's the only viable. Yes, I saw the confrontation. In my professional opinion, Officer Riley acted. Yes, ma'am. Yes, I understand. Thank you, Captain. Grace hung up and stared at Kyle, her eyes wide with disbelief. She's emailing a signed, scathing, and incredibly supportive letter directly to Judge Miller's clerk right now. She said she hates a bully, and right now she's not convinced you're the bully in this story. An hour later, Kale was walking out of Emmanuel Hospital. He was carrying a small, sleeping Cora in a brand-new, top-of-the-line infant carrier. Bisham, Leo, dressed in a warm new coat Grace had sourced from the hospital's charity closet, was holding his hands so tightly his knuckles were white. Mr. Warren had been there, his face a thunderous mask of fury as he watched Kyle sign the emergency paperwork, but he had been rendered utterly powerless. They drove to the bungalow in Kale's truck, Leo silent in the back seat, just watching his sister's carrier. When they pulled into the driveway, Shadow was waiting in the front window. Kale got out and unbuckled Leo, lifting him onto the grass. Welcome home, Leo. It's just for a little while, but you're safe here. Kale went to get Cora, and as he did, the front door, which he'd left unlocked, nudged open. Shadow trotted out, his movements slow and non-threatening, his tail giving a single, cautious wag. Leo froze. He stared at the big black dog, his eyes wide. Shadow approached slowly and sat, lowering his head. He let out a soft whine. Leo took one hesitant step, then another. He reached out a small, trembling hand and laid it on the dog's massive head. Shadow leaned into the touch, closing his eyes. Leo let out a small, quiet sound. It was a giggle. He buried his face in Shadow's thick ruff, his shoulders shaking, not with sobs, but with laughter. It was the first time Kale had ever seen the boy smile. The bungalow, once Kyle's silent refuge, had transformed into a complex, bewildering outpost. The first 72 hours with Leo and Cora were a blurred montage of profound awkwardness, sheer panic, and fleeting, terrifying moments of normalcy. Kyle, a man trained to breach doors and neutralize threats, found himself utterly defeated by a diaper genie. Grace Harding had been their savior. She had arrived an hour after Kyle brought the children home, armed with a carload of emergency supplies from a CPS donation cache, a pop-up bassinet, several boxes of diapers, a frightening array of bottles and cans of formula with instructions he read like they were a chemical compound analysis. He was a man adrift in a sea of domesticity, and Grace was his only lifeline. She showed him how to test the milk temperature on his wrist, how to swaddle Cora until she resembled a tiny, content burrito, and how to talk to Leo, not with questions, but with simple, declarative statements. We are going to eat lunch now, Leo. Shadow is going to sit here while we watch cartoons. But Leo remained a quiet, watchful ghost. The brilliant, healing smile Kale had seen when the boy met Shadow had vanished, tucked away again behind a wall of trauma. Leo spoke only in whispers, and only to the dog. He would sit on the living room floor, his small back pressed against Shadow's warm, solid flank, murmuring secrets into the dog's black fur, while Cora slept nearby in her bassinet. Shadow, in turn, had adapted with a quiet dignity, transforming from a high-drive canine into a stoic, furry guardian, his amber eyes tracking Leo's every move. Kyle's administrative leave was a new kind of hell. He felt his authority, his very identity, stripped away. He was still a cop, but his badge sat uselessly on his dresser. He was trapped, pacing his own home, waiting for two things: Marcus Holt to make his next move, and Mia Chen to call. The call came late on the third night. Kael was sitting in the dim light of the living room, watching Cora's tiny chest rise and fall in the bassinet. Leo was finally asleep, curled on a mattress Kael had put on the floor of his own bedroom. His phone vibrated, an unknown number. He snatched it. "Yeah." "It's me." Mia's voice was low, all business. "St. John's, the diner on Lombard. 45 minutes. Come alone. Don't look like a cop." The line went dead. Kael's heart hammered. He immediately called Grace, his voice strained. "Grace, I have an emergency. I have to go out. It's about the case. Can you—" "I'm on my way," she said, no questions asked. 20 minutes later, she slipped into the house, her face pale with her own exhaustion, but she gave him a determined nod. "Go. They'll be fine." Kael changed into his most nondescript clothes, dark jeans, a black hoodie, and a worn baseball cap pulled low. He drove his personal truck, not the cruiser, and he spent the entire drive watching his rearview mirror, his senses screaming with paranoia. The St. John's Diner was a relic, a pool of greasy fluorescent light under the imposing steel arch of the bridge. He slid into a corner booth. Mia Chen was already there, hunched over a laptop, a half-empty mug of coffee beside her. She looked, as intended, like just another sleep-deprived Portland State student. Her black hair was hidden under a gray beanie, and she wore a university hoodie. She didn't look up when he sat down. "You look like hell, Kael," she muttered, her eyes scanning the lines of code on her screen. "You too, Chen." "Yeah, well," she said, finally closing the laptop. "I've been busy doing about 5 different things that could get me fired, or indicted." She pushed the laptop bag aside. "You were right to be suspicious. Your uncle is a piece of work." "Gambling?" Kael guessed, his voice low. Mia nodded. "Oh yeah, and he's bad at it, really bad. I ran his financials. He's got online accounts flagged by 3 different services. He's into a bookie in Seattle for at least 50 grand. He has liens on his car, his apartment. The man's been circling the drain for a year. He's desperate, Kael, the kind of desperate that makes people do really stupid, predictable things." "Like selling his family," Kael said, the words cold. "Like using them as a lottery ticket," Mia corrected. She slid her phone across the table. The screen lit up. "This is where it gets interesting. I pulled his phone records. Obviously, he's been talking to his lawyer, Finch. No surprise. But then, I pulled Finch's records." Her finger tapped the screen, showing a call log. "Finch is dirty, or at least, he's unethical as hell. Guess who he was calling?" Kael leaned in, his eyes narrowing. He recognized the number from the Chronicle's website. "Carla Velez." "Bingo," Mia said, a grim smile touching her lips. "Not just once. They had 3 calls the day before your friend Marcus Holt held his little press conference. They weren't just coordinating, they were planning, but that's not even the kicker." She swiped to another screen. It was a bank transfer, a wire for $2,000, moving from a holding company owned by Finch's law firm to an account in the name of Marcus Holt. The transfer was dated the morning of the press conference. "He wasn't just found, Kael," Mia whispered, the diner's ambient noise fading to a dull roar. "He was recruited. Finch and Velez found this loser, paid off his immediate debts, bought him a suit, and threw him in front of the cameras." The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture so ugly it took Kyle's breath away. "The Velez article," he said, his voice flat. "The one painting me as unstable. That was the setup." "It was the predicate," Mia confirmed, her analytical mind laying it out. "Step 1. Velez's article establishes you as a volatile cop, creating a public narrative that the children are unsafe with the system. Step 2. Finch and Velez discover the grieving uncle, Marcus. Step 3. Marcus petitions for custody. Step 4. Marcus, now with custody, files a massive civil suit against the city of Portland and you, personally, for emotional distress and endangering his family." Citing Velez's article as the primary evidence, Kael finished, his stomach twisting. "It's a perfect self-contained loop, a manufactured crisis and a manufactured savior. Velez gets the exclusive career-making story. Finch gets a third of a massive city settlement, and Marcus gets enough to pay off his bookie. And the kids?" Kael asked, though he already knew the answer. "Are the bait," Mia said softly. "They're just leverage. Once Marcus gets the money, you think he's sticking around to play dad? He'll dump them back into the system within 6 months. Warren will get them anyway." Kael stared into his cold coffee. his hands clenched so hard his knuckles were white. He had been played. He wasn't just a bystander. He was a pawn in their game. His uniform used to build their narrative. So, what do we do? Mia's expression hardened. She reached into her bag and slid a slim black USB drive across the table. I'm a data analyst, KL. I don't do anything. I just find things. And I found everything. The phone logs, the text messages between Finch and Velez, where they're literally scripting Marcus's speech, the wire transfer, the offshore betting accounts, it's all there. Kyle picked up the drive. It felt impossibly heavy, like a grenade with the pin pulled. This is illegal, Mia. All of it. This is fruit of the poisonous tree. A judge will throw it out in a second, and you'll be fired. It'll be thrown out if a cop presents it in a criminal case, Mia said, her eyes sharp. But a civil custody hearing, where the best interests of the child are the only standard, a judge might be very interested to know that the petitioning uncle is a paid actor in a fraud scheme. She stood up, slinging her laptop bag over her shoulder. I was never here. This conversation never happened. And that drive, you found it in your mailbox. Anonymous tip. Got it? Kale looked up at her, the exhaustion in his face replaced by a cold, hard focus. Got it. Thank you, Mia. Don't thank me, she said, pulling her beanie low. Just don't get caught. And Kyle, win. She slipped out of the diner, disappearing into the Portland night, leaving Kyle alone in the booth with the small black drive that contained the truth. The Multnomah County Courthouse was a monolith of gray stone and grim purpose, a place Kyle knew well from the witness stand, but never from the petitioner's table. He sat on a hard wooden bench in the hallway, feeling wrong in his best and only suit. It was the suit he had worn to his wife's funeral, and it felt stiff, suffocating, a costume of a civilian he no longer knew how to be. In his pocket, his fingers compulsively traced the outline of the USB drive Mia had given him, a grenade with no pin, a truth he couldn't legally use. Grace Harding sat beside him, nervously shuffling a stack of papers. She had arranged for a trusted CPS carer to stay with Leo and Cora at the bungalow, a concession that had torn Kyle apart. Leo hadn't understood, his small face crumpling in quiet betrayal as Kale left, only soothed when Shadow was permitted to stay behind, a silent, furry bodyguard on the living room floor. You're the respondent, Kyle, Grace whispered, trying to sound confident. We're on defense. Just be honest. Focus on the kids. That's all that matters. Kyle nodded, his jaw tight. They're here. The opposing team swept into the hallway, a small whirlwind of smug confidence. Mr. Finch, the slick lawyer, led the way, his briefcase swinging. Behind him was Marcus Holt, looking even paler and more rumpled than he had on TV, his eyes darting around nervously. And beside him, looking as sharp and predatory as a hawk, was Carla Velez, clutching a reporter's notebook. She wasn't just here to report. She was here to testify. Their final player, Mr. Warren, arrived last, his face pinched with the self-righteous certainty of a man who believes protocol is a synonym for justice. They were called into the courtroom, a small, functional room with beige walls and an air of quiet desperation. This was family court, where victories were often just the least tragic outcome. At the front sat the Honorable Judge Alani Miller. She was a woman in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind half-moon glasses and dark, gray-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun. She was known for having zero tolerance for theatrics and a radar for liars that was legendary. She peered down at the assembled parties. This is an emergency custody hearing regarding the minors Leo and Cora Holt, she stated, her voice like gravel. I have the petition from the maternal uncle, Mr. Marcus Holt. I have the counter-petition for emergency temporary placement from the respondent, Officer Kaylin Riley, filed by CPS worker Grace Harding. And I have the official CPS recommendation from Supervisor Warren, which advocates for neither. A busy morning, she looked at Finch. You filed. You first. Finch stood, his voice smooth and empathetic. He painted a beautiful picture of Marcus, a man shattered by his sister's tragic and still mysterious death, who had been searching for his family, only to find them through a horrifying media circus. He described Marcus as the only stable, loving blood relative, the only one who could provide a permanent familial home. Then he pivoted. But this hearing, Your Honor, is also about an imminent danger to the children. The man who currently has them, Officer Riley, is not a savior. He is an unstable, volatile individual. Kael's hands clenched into fists. To prove this, Finch continued, I call my first witness, Ms. Carla Velez. Carla Velez took the stand, was sworn in, and proceeded to execute Kael with chilling professionalism. She didn't just read her article, she expounded on it. My sources at the hospital confirmed Officer Riley was aggressive, intimidating. Finch led her skillfully. And is it true you uncovered his service record, one involving volatility? Yes, Velez said, her voice dripping with journalistic concern. I confirmed he was involved in a fatal officer-involved shooting 3 years prior, a high-stress incident that led to a mandatory psychological review. Next, Mr. Warren was called. He, in his nasal monotone, confirmed that Kael had been obstructive, combative, and deeply unprofessional. He stated that Officer Riley had, in his opinion, traumatized the boy further by defying a direct CPS order. He then advocated again for the separation of the children into state-run facilities. The case was collapsing. Kael was a volatile, obstructive cop who had defied CPS. Marcus Holt was the grieving family. Grace was called next. Her voice shook, but she didn't break. She recounted in stark clinical detail Leo's condition at the hospital. Mr. Warren is correct that I am his subordinate, Your Honor, but I am also the only social worker who observed the child. Leo's vital signs were stable until Mr. Warren announced the separation. The child's heart rate exceeded 150 BPM. He was in medical distress. Officer Riley's obstruction was, in my medical opinion, a de-escalation. She then spoke of the bungalow. He has stopped speaking, Your Honor, except to Officer Riley and to his canine partner, Shadow. He has a profound pre-verbal trauma bond. To move him again, to separate him from the only two beings on Earth he trusts, it would be catastrophic. It is not in the best interests of the child. Judge Miller looked torn, her brow furrowed. Mr. Finch, your witness's testimony regarding the officer's past is troubling. Ms. Harding, your testimony on the child's immediate state is compelling. I am conflicted. This was it. Kael felt the USB drive. He knew what was on it. He could stand up, yell, accuse them, and be dismissed as the volatile cop everyone claimed he was. He was trapped. Your Honor? The voice came from the back of the courtroom. The doors swung open, and Captain Eva Rostova entered. She was in her full, perfectly pressed Class A uniform, her command insignia gleaming. The entire room seemed to suck in its breath. Captain Rostova, Judge Miller said, visibly surprised. You are not on my witness list. Am not here as a witness, Your Honor, Rostova said, walking down the aisle, her presence radiating an authority that dwarfed everyone else. I am here as Officer Riley's commanding officer. Very well, the judge said, leaning forward. Please proceed, Captain. Rostova stood beside Kael. She did not look at him. She addressed the judge. Your Honor, I am the one who placed Officer Riley on administrative leave. It was a procedural necessity because of the political circus created by Ms. Velez and Mr. Finch. Carla Velez shot to her feet. Objection. That's... Sit down, Ms. Velez, Judge Miller snapped. You are a witness, not counsel. Continue, Captain. Rostova's voice was cold, precise. Ms. Velez characterized Officer Riley as volatile based on a fatal shooting. I was on the review board for that shooting. Officer Riley was awarded the department's Medal of Valor for his actions that day. He ran towards a gunman to save 3 civilians. His mandatory review was standard procedure, and he was cleared for duty in 48 hours. He is, quite simply, the finest, most level-headed officer I have. She then turned her gaze on Warren. His obstruction of Mr. Warren was, in my opinion, an act of advocacy. He recognized a medical crisis, a child's terror, that your own supervisor failed to see. Furthermore, Rostova continued, pulling a file from her briefcase, this entire petition from Mr. Holt is predicated on a fraud. Finch leaped up. Objection, foundation, speculation. It is neither, Counselor, Rostova said, her voice chilling. This morning, my precinct's cybercrimes division received an anonymous tip. Kael looked at Rostova, his heart stopping. He saw the barest flicker of an eyelid from his captain. She knew. She had received Mia's real report. "This tip," Rostova said, handing the file to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge, contained bank records showing a $2,000 wire transfer from Mr. Finch's law firm to Mr. Holt, dated the morning of his press conference. It contains text messages between Mr. Finch and Ms. Velez, scripting Mr. Holt's grieving uncle's speech. It contains records of Mr. Holt's extensive online gambling debts. "This is not a custody hearing, Your Honor. This is an attempted fraud against the city of Portland." The courtroom was dead silent. Carla Velez was the color of chalk. Finch was sputtering, his face slick with sweat. Marcus Holt looked like he was going to be physically ill. Judge Miller read the documents, her face growing darker with every page. Finally, she looked up, her eyes like chips of ice. "Mr. Finch, Ms. Velez, Mr. Holt, I am recommending the district attorney open an immediate criminal investigation into all three of you for conspiracy, fraud, and perjury." She slammed her gavel. "The petition from Marcus Holt is denied with prejudice. Temporary custody of both minor children, Leo and Cora Holt, is granted in full to Officer Kaylin Riley, pending a full evidentiary hearing. Mr. Warren," she added, her voice dripping with contempt, "your department will not interfere with this placement. You are dismissed." The air in the courtroom hallway was suddenly too thin. Kyle leaned against the beige wall, the adrenaline of the fight draining away, leaving his legs weak. Grace Harding was beside him, openly crying tears of pure, unadulterated relief, her case files clutched to her chest. Captain Rostova stepped out of the courtroom, her face as impassive as ever, but her dark eyes, when they met Kyle's, held something he'd never seen before, a flicker of profound approval. She stopped directly in front of him. "Riley." "Ma'am," Cale managed, straightening up, pulling his suit jacket down. "That was—" Rostova held up a hand, cutting him off. "That," she said, her voice low, "was a necessary, political, and extremely well-executed maneuver. Mia Chen has been temporarily reassigned to my personal task force, where her talents can be properly supervised." She allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile, a tiny crack in her stoic facade. "Your administrative leave is over, effective immediately. However, I am ordering you to take an additional week of paid leave. Your house is no longer up to a bachelor's inspection code. Get it in order, officer." It wasn't a suggestion. It was the kindest order he'd ever received. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me," Rostova said, her face becoming stern again. "You won this. Now, go home to your kids." She gave a curt nod to Grace and walked away, her authority radiating down the hall, leaving Kyle and Grace in her wake. The months that followed were a blur. The world outside Cale's bungalow righted itself with a cold, swift efficiency. The criminal case against the trio was fast-tracked. Carla Velez, her career in ruins after the Chronicle fired her for ethical violations, took a plea deal, her testimony sinking the other two. Finch was disbarred before the trial even concluded. Marcus Holt, faced with overwhelming evidence of fraud and child endangerment, was sentenced to 3 years, a broken, pathetic man who seemed almost relieved to be someone else's problem. Mr. Warren was quietly reassigned to a windowless office in the records department, a bureaucratic ghost. But inside the bungalow, a much quieter, more profound revolution was taking place. Kael's small, tidy home was overrun. The sterile silence was replaced by the Teletubbies theme song, the gurgle of a bottle warmer, and the near-constant click-click-click of Shadow's claws on the hardwood floor as he patiently followed Leo from room to room. Kyle's life became a chaotic, exhausting, and utterly wonderful schedule of 3 a.m. feedings for Cora and 3 a.m. nightmares for Leo. He learned to cook one-handed while bouncing a colicky baby. He learned that a 5-year-old's drawings, endless, vibrant crayon pictures of a big black dog, a man in a blue shirt, and 2 small stick figures were more valuable than any citation. Leo began to talk. It started as whispers, directed only at Shadow. Then, one day, Kale was fumbling with a pot of boiling pasta, and Leo simply said, "It's hot." Kyle dropped the spoon, staring at the boy as if he'd just recited Shakespeare. From there, the dam broke. Leo was a smart, inquisitive boy, his trauma slowly receding, replaced by an endless stream of questions. Why is Shadow's fur black? Why do you have a badge? Why does Cora cry? Are we having mac and cheese? Kyle, in turn, found himself changing. The hard edges of the cop, the lonely, grieving widower, were being sanded away. He was still Kyle, but he was also Dad. The final court date was set for a bright, clear morning in early summer, 9 months after the rescue. This was not the adversarial beige room of the custody hearing. This was the adoption court, a room on a higher floor, filled with sunlight, polished wood, and an air of quiet joy. Cale stood at the petitioner's table. Grace Harding was beside him, her professional suit replaced by a bright floral dress. She was here as a friend. Cora, now a healthy, smiling 9-month-old, was babbling happily on Grace's hip, her chubby fingers tangled in Grace's auburn hair. Leo stood next to Cale, his hand gripping Cale's. He was wearing a small navy blue suit jacket, his dark hair neatly combed, but he had made one non-negotiable request. Kyle wasn't wearing his somber gray suit. At Leo's insistence, he was in his full Class A dress uniform. The pressed blue wool, the gleaming badge, the symbols of the man who had pulled him from the cold. Judge Alani Miller entered, but this time, she wasn't wearing her severe black robe. She was in a simple judicial suit, and when she saw the family, she smiled. "Well," she said, her voice warm, "this is certainly a more pleasant occasion. Ms. Harding, your final report?" "Your Honor," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion, "I have never, in my career, been more certain of a placement. The children are not just surviving, they are thriving. Cora has met all her developmental milestones. And Leo is a different child. He is happy, secure, and profoundly bonded to both his sister and his father. I have no reservations. This is a family." Judge Miller nodded, reading the report she already knew by heart. She looked at Kyle. "Officer Riley, this is usually the part where I ask if you are certain you are ready for the lifelong commitment of fatherhood. But looking at you, that question seems redundant. Do you have anything you wish to say?" Kyle looked down at Leo, who looked up at him with absolute trust. He then looked at Cora, who was chewing on Grace's necklace. "Your Honor," Cale said, his voice rough, "for a long time, my house wasn't a home. It was just a place I slept. I was a cop. That's all I was. The night I found them, I thought I was performing a rescue. I thought I was saving them." He paused, his throat tightening. "I was wrong. They were saving me. They are not a commitment, Your Honor. They are my life. They are my family." The judge's eyes were bright. She picked up her pen. "In the matter of the adoptions of Leo Holt and Cora Holt, there is no doubt in this court's mind. The parental rights of the biological parents are hereby terminated. Full and permanent adoption is granted to Kaylin Riley." She signed the paper with a flourish, the scratch of the pen the loudest sound in the room. "Congratulations, Officer Riley," or perhaps I should say, "Congratulations, Dad." Kyle let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 9 months. He knelt, his formal uniform creaking, and pulled Leo into a one-armed hug. Leo, who had been silent and solemn, suddenly wrapped his arms around Kyle's neck, his face buried in the blue wool. "We're home, Dad," he whispered. Kyle squeezed his eyes shut, his other arm coming up to hold his son. "Yeah, buddy," he whispered back. "We're home." That evening, the bungalow was far from the quiet, sterile place it had been. It was Christmas, a celebration Cale hadn't bothered with in years. A slightly lopsided tree stood in the corner, covered in handmade ornaments from Leo and blinking lights. Grace and Mia Chen were there, sitting on the floor with Shadow, helping Leo build a complex Lego structure. Cale stood by the fireplace, bouncing Cora, who was giggling in her new Christmas pajamas. He looked at the scene, his friends, his loyal partner, his daughter, and his son, who was now excitedly explaining the finer points of Lego rocket ships to a highly decorated cybercrimes officer. The house was loud, messy, and filled with the scent of pine and roasting turkey. Kyle looked up at the mantel, where a new framed photo sat. A man in a police uniform, a little boy in a matching blue suit, and a smiling baby standing on the courthouse steps. It was chaotic. It was imperfect. And it was his. The story of Officer Kyle, Leo, Cora, and Shadow is a powerful reminder. On the coldest, darkest night, in a place that seemed hopeless, a miracle was waiting. Some might call it coincidence that Kale and Shadow were there at that exact second, but we call it divine providence. It was God's whisper, guiding Shadow, nudging Kyle to that exact spot. He didn't just send an officer to save those children. He sent two terrified children to save a man who had forgotten what home felt like. In our own lives, we all face storms. We all have our own bridges of loneliness, loss, or doubt. But God is always working in the quiet. Your miracle might not be finding children in the rain. It might be the neighbor who needs a kind word, or the stranger you feel a silent urge to help. Kael answered that call. Will you? If this story of faith and finding family touched your heart, please help us spread this message of hope. Share this video with someone who needs to see a miracle. Comment below and tell us about a time God turned a dark moment into a blessing for you. And please subscribe to our channel for more stories that prove God's love is always at work. Thank you for watching. May God bless you, protect your family, and always guide you to be the miracle someone else is praying for.